Well, everyone, the Samsung Galaxy Note 8 is one of those phones that came out so many years ago, and I will tell you, there's a lot of reasons to not buy this phone anymore. It's pretty old. It's an old phone. We all kind of know what to expect from this type of device. It came out in 2017, but it's so crazy because even this 2017 device holds up fairly well in a lot of different ways, and you would never believe how good of a job Samsung was able to do on their phones back then, which makes me very curious because looking at the future of these particular devices, like the Galaxy S24s and whatnot, like how long are these phones going to last? Now that they have 7 years of software updates, I wonder how the hardware and software is going to last on these phones in the future. So, if you want to pick up some phones I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Samsung Galaxy Note 8, we have a fairly large, this is a pretty big display at that time, 6.3-inch Super AMOLED display. Now, 6.3 inches is like the smallest size. We have a 6.2-inch display on the small Galaxy S24, but these panels at that time were very, very large, and they were very good panels. 1440p display. Back in 2017, this phone came out, I think, right before the iPhone X came out, so you had to compare this thing against the iPhone 7 Plus display, and this thing definitely had one of the best displays of that year, and even now, to this day, it's still a very, very good panel. How was Samsung able to do this good of a job with their panels? It's like not even fair, to be honest. We had a little tiny bit of bezel at the top and a tiny bit of bezel at the bottom with curved sides on this particular phone. And you have to remember where Samsung was coming from. Right before this, they had the Galaxy Note 7, and obviously that thing completely catastrophic failure, to be honest, because of its explosion thing. But that panel was really good, but it still had a home button and had a top bezel. And this one removed those two things. It still had a little bit of bezel on the top and the bottom, and it was kind of coming off the success, I would say, of the Galaxy S8. So you did have a little bit of like kind of cushion from that particular, from that release. But this was a very good looking display. Samsung really did a good job with this particular panel. On the bottom, you're getting USB Type-C port, which is great. The S Pen, which is a stylus kind of thing, one of the biggest, features of the Note lineup was that S Pen. So you can just go ahead and take it out, draw on the display, do lots and lots of cool stuff on this display, which was genuinely very cool. Then you were also getting that headphone jack as well. So you can just go ahead and plug in this particular headphone jack here, pretty much just use that as you normally would. And you were also getting that micro SD card slot. That was another very cool thing. I love having a micro SD card slot, and anytime we have that type of capability on these older phones, it's genuinely so awesome. So without a doubt, I would definitely tell you that IO, those types of things, it's genuinely insane that you basically had that type of capability at that time, which was very, very cool. So that was in and of itself, again, a really cool thing going on for this particular phone. On the backside, you had glass back, which was very cool. Again, having glass back is very awesome. And once again, that's another really cool thing going on for this particular device too, that you can go ahead and just basically just, plug in this particular, that you can basically just go ahead and have that type of capability there, which again is very, very cool. You had wireless charging, you had that, dual camera setup on the backside, which was again a really nice touch. Once again, having a dual camera setup is always nicer than having a single camera setup. And I do think that this type of camera was actually pretty good at that time, which again was a very cool thing. You were getting, a really good feeling phone. This thing felt very expensive and it still looks very good. Like it still looks like a very, very good phone. I think if Samsung were to release this phone today as a cheaper phone, and if they refresh the internals, the hardware and the exterior is still perfectly fine. I think people would probably end up buying this thing. They did such a good job with this type of display and the type of build quality at that time. Now, the thing with the price tag of this phone is that it has gone down in the used market substantially for the last several years. It's just been falling and falling. But I don't know if I would recommend people to buy this phone. But for a collector's item and things like that, we'll talk about that later. But this thing has gone down in the value in the used market quite a bit, obviously, because it is a super old phone that's been unsupported with software for quite a bit of time. In terms of the camera side though, this thing's camera is still actually not bad. You're getting that dual camera setup on the backside, so 12 megapixel wide and a 12 megapixel telephoto lens, and you were also getting a kind of a dual camera setup on the front, an 8 megapixel wide angle lens and then a 2 megapixel kind of eye camera. And the thing that I actually liked a lot about this particular camera at that time was that it was like a pretty good, camera. Like Samsung did a good job at this time. And I don't know if this was the first phone to bring a dual camera setup from Samsung, but it was probably one of the first ones of their major flagship. And I genuinely do think this was a very solid camera. This thing did a really good job at that time. And again, that was a very good, very, very good thing going on for this particular phone at that moment. Having this type of camera quality was very good, but I will tell you there's a few things going on here now. For one, this camera quality isn't that great compared to the current generation Samsungs, and I do think since 2019, the Samsung Galaxy S10 and the Note 10s, those cameras were substantially better than the Galaxy the Galaxy Note 8 and the S8. That this camera quality definitely has kind of gone down. Another big thing, a lot of cameras nowadays are better because they, have things like an ultra wide camera. This one just had that telephoto lens, which some people may be turned off with. It's not that big of a deal, but definitely people prefer something like an ultra wide camera like myself, or rather than just a telephoto lens. But I look at the Galaxy Note 8 camera, and for how old this phone is, I still think it's a decent camera lens, but you can definitely tell that it's an aged phone because the camera UI is very laggy. There's still lots of features built in, but the performance of this phone isn't really that much anymore. So it's definitely going to kind of age in how the camera takes photos and the shutter lag and all that stuff too. So keep that in mind, but it's still like a fairly decent camera for how old this phone is, but I would not recommend using it, or buying it because of the camera, if that makes sense. Now, in terms of the software longevity, this is by far the one area of this phone I would definitely not recommend buying this phone in anymore. This phone has been unsupported with software since Android 9.0. We're on basically Android 14 right now on all the phones that we have on the current generation of Samsung. So that is a very big thing to keep in mind, that this phone makes zero sense to buy because we are essentially outdated with software. But the other big thing going on here too is that with the Samsung Galaxy S24s, these phones are now giving us 7 years of software and security updates. So why would you go ahead and buy this one when you can buy a Galaxy S24 and just get a substantially massive increase in software and longevity? That is probably one of the biggest things, and one of the reasons why I look at this phone as like, why would you even want to buy this phone anymore? Because it's already outdated, and the newer phones are actually well worth the money. And even if you don't want to buy those phones, you can still just go ahead and just buy a used Galaxy S24 in like 4 months and still save a bunch of money that way. So the choice is yours, but that's another thing to kind of keep in mind there too. In terms of performance, at the time when this phone came out, it was a good performing phone. Clearly this thing is not really that great of a performing phone anymore. Had that Snapdragon 835 chipset, but it did have 6 gigabytes of RAM, which is actually a decent amount of RAM to have inside of a phone. Even at that time, it was really good, but nowadays it's still actually decent. The thing with this phone's performance is that, this thing is not that good of a performing device anymore, and that's just kind of what happens when you're getting some of these older phones. So this thing, when it first came out, not bad, it was a very good performing phone, probably one of the best performing phones of 2017. Even going into 2018, this thing was also a very good performing phone. But when it comes down to today, how it holds up right now, it is a pretty old, outdated device, and that's just kind of what happens once again when you're getting these types of phones. It's a fairly older, slower type of device, and again, that's just kind of what happens when you're getting these types of phones. It's not a terrible phone though. I still think it, if you need it to do certain things, it can still do certain things. And I was even able to play Genshin Impact on this thing not that long ago, and it really wasn't even that bad of an experience. But it's not until you get up to like the newer levels, like the newer games and newer applications and all those things, that's when these games and this phone doesn't really hold up that well. So kind of just keep that in mind. But what I'll tell you is the Samsung Galaxy Note 8, I probably would not recommend buying this phone anymore. But it's really interesting how good of a job Samsung did with this phone at that time. I think Samsung knocked it out of the park, and I think they did a really good job with this phone when they first released it. But I would tell you, like most other games and most other phones that come out that are kind of outdated, it is an older, outdated phone. It's not getting software updates anymore, so I really wouldn't recommend buying this phone anymore. But with that being said, I still think it's a very smart idea to buy a Samsung phone. I think going to the Galaxy S21 or S22, if you want to buy like the Note 20, I probably wouldn't even recommend buying that. But one of the current S genres, like the S21 Ultra, very good phones. I would recommend buying those ones for sure. Just probably I wouldn't recommend buying the Galaxy Note 8 anymore. So that pretty much covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.